Guys, it's happened. Finally, the day I've been waiting for since I heard the allegations about Geoffrey. From not just his previous girlfriend, but his previous 3, 4, 5 relationships. Geoffrey's finally in chains, Geoffrey's finally in jail for the next 18 years, without the possibility of parole. The women of Tennessee are safe for at least 18 years from Geoffrey Paschel. His sentencing took place last Friday, and he fought tooth and nail to reduce his sentence as much as he could. But the judge wasn't having any of it. He fought tooth and nail, but ultimately was very unsuccessful. In fact, his lame attempts to justify his actions and to defend himself fell on deaf ears, and in fact he did more damage than even he could have imagined. Like myself, the judge saw through his lies, and he had Geoffrey's character down to an absolute T. I've got you covered. Here's how it all went down. Just before we begin, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you enjoy my content. And also don't forget to hit the like button and the notification bell if you don't want to miss any of my future videos. So without further ado, the sentencing of Geoffrey Paschel. So this trial sentencing began with an argument between defence and prosecution, because Geoffrey's ex-wife, Alison Moon, wanted to come into court and testify about what Geoffrey put her through during their relationship, which was 15 years ago in 2007, and she alleged physical, mental and sexual violence. And so the point of her coming in to give her testimony was to add enhancement factors for Geoffrey's sentencing. So if the prosecution were able to prove that this had been Geoffrey's behaviour for many, many years, he stood to get a greater sentence than if it were a one-off incident. And of course, Geoffrey didn't want anyone to hear her testimony, even though he said it was all lies. And his lawyer tried unsuccessfully to argue that his previous conduct, 1, hadn't been proven in a court of law, and 2, was a result of her getting together with Kristen Chapman, who's the victim in this latest case, for which, as you know, he was found guilty. And the lawyer said that these two had got together just to get back at Geoffrey and to stop him from having access to the son that he has with Alison. Now this was laughable to me for 2 reasons. Firstly, she'd been making these allegations for many years, in fact predating the time that he kidnapped and physically abused Kristen Chapman in 2019. And so how could she have made up allegations with Kristen when she'd already made the same allegations before she even knew of the existence of Kristen? And the second point is, it's ridiculous to say that she made all these things up simply to stop him having a relationship with his son, because of course his prison sentence was a minimum, absolute minimum of 8 years. His son's now 10, so his son would be 18 when he got out regardless, so that wouldn't have mattered to his ex-wife at all. And his lawyer argued if this testimony wasn't to be heard, they wanted to go for the minimum sentencing range for the crimes he committed, which with no enhancement factors would have been from 8 to 12 years. But the judge had already previously said the sentencing range was going to be from 12 to 20 years, with no possibility of parole. So he was always just really unlikely to get away with this, with or without her testimony. But in the end, the judge ruled that her testimony was going to be allowed, even though they hadn't had chance, allegedly, to investigate his ex-wife's claims. So the judge overruled all of this, and Geoffrey had to sit there, in his prison suit, complete with handcuffs on, and listen to her testimony of their relationship. Guys, it made awful listening. But what made it even worse was, as she gave her testimony, there were 3 to 4 women sitting in the back of the court who were obviously pro-Geoffrey, shaking their head and laughing at allegations as she made them. Geoffrey had his head down and was shaking his head as she made her claims, and she said that he'd attacked her on many different occasions, and she talked us through some of those occasions. He used to smash up her phone so she couldn't call for law enforcement or call for help. He'd disabled her car and taken her car keys so she couldn't go anywhere. And he'd also SA'd her during this time. But what I found quite interesting was the testimony about the phone and the car keys were the same from both women. He tried to prevent them from getting away or getting help. And she also gave one specific time when she'd actually moved away from him, and I think she went to Miami where her parents lived. And randomly, a few months later, Geoffrey just opened the back door to her parents' house in the guise of trying to get back together again, and when she refused, he made loads of threats and again physically assaulted her. She said his assaults went on for the whole 5-year duration of their marriage. And each time she tried to leave, he would say he was really sorry and coerce her back. And she didn't want to split up with him because she wanted to create a complete family unit for Geoffrey and their son. Geoffrey's lawyer did the age-old, why didn't you leave? Why didn't you call the police every single time something happened? Why did you get back together? Why didn't you press charges? And she pointed out, as many women in this sort of situation do, she went up and down about pressing charges, and she also knew that it was very difficult to prove the things that she was saying. And she didn't actually make this claim, but I can imagine it would be quite difficult to go to the police about the father of your child, because you risk incarcerating them and depriving your son of a relationship with his father. And at one point the judge actually had to say, can the people in the gallery stop having audible responses to the witness testimony? They didn't even want to let her speak without laughing and heckling. And so after his ex-wife's testimony, Kristen Chapman took the stand to talk about the impact that Geoffrey's actions had on her since his 2019 attack. And she said she's still scared of answering the door now, and even though she's remarried and she's trying to move on with her life, she still always has flashbacks about the attacks that Geoffrey carried out on her. Again, his lawyer tried to say that she was lying. No point, lawyer, he's already been found guilty. But he was more or less trying to say, you're a school teacher, and incidentally his ex-wife was a school teacher as well, which is interesting. But he was trying to say, you're a school teacher, you could have gone and got a restraining order against him, or you could have taken it the legal route. Well, she did in the end, it just took her a while to get there. So after hearing all the testimony from the prosecution, it was time for the defence. And basically the defence was, Geoffrey didn't do it. But like I said, he's already been found guilty, so kind of pointless. And then also, his mitigating factors were that he had 40 odd letters from different people. Lots of them professionals, lawyers and teachers and people that he's known for many years, all saying Geoffrey's a great guy and they have never seen this side of Geoffrey, and they haven't witnessed any violent acts from him. Well, no, they haven't seen that because they weren't in a relationship with Geoffrey. And they were saying Geoffrey's an avowed Christian, as if that somehow makes it impossible that he could have ever done anything wrong. Geoffrey and his legal team know as well as we all do, going to church doesn't make you a Christian any more than standing in a garage makes you a car. And even in the ultra-competitive field of 90 Day Fiancé, Geoffrey's undoubtedly the biggest wanker by a country mile. And in my opinion, Geoffrey has zero endearing qualities. He's a cold and duplicitous sly creature. And quite frankly, I'd like to kick him in the bollocks so hard that my shoes burst into flames. That's how I feel about Geoffrey. And it would seem I have a kindred spirit. Enter Judge Kyle Hickson. Because the judge ruled that his previous wife's testimony was admissible. Therefore, his sentencing range was between 12 and 20 years without the possibility of parole. And the prosecution, they asked for him to be sentenced to 16 years. The Ebird was hoping for 20, but hey-ho. And the defence, of course, asked that he serve only 12 years. By this point, even they'd given up on asking for 8. Oh, and I nearly forgot one other thing. The defence also wanted to throw out his earlier drugs charges for which he was imprisoned, possession of cocaine with an intention to distribute, because that crime took place in a different state. And in order for it to be considered in Tennessee, they had to have all of the details of that crime, and for some reason, missing on the details was the actual amount of drugs that he had. And so the defence wanted to get the whole of the drugs charge thrown out, as if it didn't happen. But again, the judge ruled in the prosecution's favour. And he said even if he had the smallest amount, which I think was half a gram, that would still be a Class C or D felony, which was enough to make sure that it wasn't going to be an 8 to 12 year sentence. But before the judge made his decision, he wanted to hear from Geoffrey. Interesting. I kind of want to hear from Geoffrey as well. What's he going to say? A final act of contrition? Maybe a bit of sorrow? Guys, here's what he said. I'm 44 years of age and I've got a whole lot of love left in me, with hopes and dreams still. I have a beautiful family with kids and grandkids. I'm a father, an uncle, a grandson, a son. Oh guys, he's forgotten a twat, a wanker, a dickhead and a criminal. And I want nothing but the best for Miss Moon and Miss Wilson. I'm punished and unbroken, but I can rehab and I want to be better no matter what. My focus is on doing just that. And as for the letters, you can see people vouch for me. I am a good person. I just want to help people. I don't want anything back from them. I just want to help. That's what kind of person I am. Have mercy on me and on my family and my kids, and give me a lenient sentence so I can get back to my family. Guys, I absolutely couldn't believe it. Not one word of contrition, he wasn't sorry at all, he didn't think about what he'd put people through, he didn't admit anything. And just moments ago, his lawyer had been fighting tooth and nail to insinuate that everything said about him was all lies. But the judge absolutely had his number, and the judge went above and beyond all of my expectations. And here's what the judge said. And this whole time, Geoffrey wasn't looking at the judge, he was looking down. And he said Mr. Paschel has dark and evil aspects of his character. He said, I'm not surprised that Mr. Paschel can convince people he's a good guy. He's handsome and charismatic and is very image conscious. But he said what this case has exposed is that what's behind closed doors is very different to what he portrays to the outside world. And guys, we saw this on 90 Day Fiancé. 1 minute, Mr. Nice Guy, and the next minute standing up and wanting to knock people out. And the judge continued, he's sick and sadistic and wants to inflict more than just physical violence on these women. He said he believes that Geoffrey has a deep psychological need to inflict as much emotional damage on these women as possible. Guys, I couldn't agree any more. We saw how he played off Varia and Mary when Varia turned up in the US to try and get Geoffrey back. He didn't care how he was hurting either woman, he wanted them to fight over him. Yes, we've seen this side of Geoffrey. And the judge made a special point to say that he was particularly worried about the time when Geoffrey just turned up out of the blue and snuck into Miss Moon's parents' house in Miami and engaged in aggressive sexual behaviour with her. And he thought that was extremely deviant. And also he was upset that Geoffrey Paschel had asked his mum to actually, during the case, to contact his ex-wife and tried to use his kids in order to get her to testify for Geoffrey in this trial. And that's against all rules, as Geoffrey was ordered not to try and make contact either himself or via a third party to any defendants or witnesses. And the judge said he's absolutely disgusting for doing that, and this court is disgusted with his actions. And then finally he said, your sentence will be 18 years without the possibility of parole. So he gave him 2 years more than even the prosecution asked for. And I loved the way the judge handled this whole case. I watched all 5 hours of the pre-sentencing argument, and it was very in-depth and no stone was left unturned. And when the judge sentenced Geoffrey, he refused to look at him and he looked back at his family and his friends in the court. Geoffrey looked really upset, but all of his tears were for himself. And he simply looked sorry for himself, and I'm really glad the judge saw through all his BS. And finally, justice was served. So guys, let me know what you think to this sentence. And what do you think to the judge's comments? I think he was absolutely on point. He got Geoffrey down to a T. He is charismatic. He is good with words. When I first saw him, I thought he's good looking. He has that gorgeous accent. I thought he was going to be a winner until I started reading about him. And Geoffrey could have taken an early plea deal and not even had prison time. But he was so arrogant, he believed he'd managed to get off the charges for some reason. And that was an extremely costly decision, one that he'll be thinking about for the next 18 years, and no doubt alongside his cellmate Dave the Frock. And Geoffrey finally gets what he deserves. So let me know what you think in comments down below, and I'll get on with my next video. And hopefully this will be the last that we hear or speak about Geoffrey Paschel. If you haven't done so yet, please don't forget to hit that big red button, mark subscribe, and make Ebird a happy Ebird. And also press the like button if you've enjoyed this video. Thank you guys so much for listening. You've been listening to Ebird Online, and I bid you a very good day.